Good afternoon, and welcome back to the Navigator booth for our final speaker of this year's Sierra Space. We are coming to you live in person as well as on virtually through LinkedIn, so we'll be taking your questions from the floor today as well as from our virtual audience. Next up, we have Colonel Tamara Campbell, Program Manager for the Advanced Tactical Aircraft Protection Systems Program Office, or PMA-272. Colonel, welcome to the stage. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining me today, and welcome to Senior Space and Navigator's booth, and with our presentation of what we have to offer from PMA-272. So hopefully this will be an engaging presentation. I'd ask that you hold your questions until the end. I'll probably brief for about 40 minutes or so, 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and allow about 15 minutes or so for questions and comments. So go to the next slide, please. So I wanted to lead off this brief. The theme for this year is get it together, right? So I wanted to lead off this brief and talking about where we've been over the last 18 months or so for PMA-272 and where we've been collectively as a group supporting DoD. So on the slide, you'll see that, we talk about the new normal and the adjustments that we've had to make. That's not just for us, it's from a government perspective. I know from the industry perspective and S&T, academia, we've had the same challenges that we've had to adjust to, right? And we also know that we're still in that situation. Things are constantly evolving. And what that asks us to do is make sure that we're flexible, that we're doing our best to make sure that we're reaching out to you guys, touching base, looking for new ways to connect, right? You'll hear that theme throughout this brief. How do we help to connect? There are many different ways that we've learned to do that over the last 18 months. And I want to continue to engage you guys to help us to know whether or not we're doing that and helping with that feedback loop and letting us know if there's ways that we haven't been doing that effectively that we can continue to press on from our team members. So we want to just capture a couple of things that I talked about. Just, despite where we've been in this environment, our focus has always been to deliver capability in the fleet. You'll see as I go through what we've been doing within the portfolio that we continue to do that, whether or not through our ASC support teams that have gone out to do groomings for the fleet, our engagements, industry days that PMT has had with industry, or in other ways that we've been able to connect despite the environment that we're in for COVID. So please, I'll tell you a little bit about the program office. I'll tell you where we are and where we intend to go. And then the next slide, I'll cover a little bit of that. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of the agenda for what we're going to cover over the next 30 minutes or so. I'm going to give you a PMA overview. I'm then going to set the scene of what drives us, right? Why do we do the things that we do? And how we set our priorities for the future. Then I want to talk about some of those focus areas that we're looking towards and what those priorities actually are. And then lean into some of our core programs within our 4 IPTs, Strike, Assault, Common, and our FMS IPT. Then I'm going to go in and just talk a little bit about ASC. What does that mean to the Department of the Navy and the Navy, as well as what that means fully and holistically for the DoD partners and also our international partners, and what we can do to help with that vision and set those priorities and collaborate with one another to get to that end state that we need to provide the best capability across the spectrum to all of the folks that engage with us to make sure that we can put, bullets on boards, right? At the end of the day, that's what we want, is to make sure that we're protecting the forces. And then at the end, I want to just talk a little bit about leaning into that theme of it together. How do we do that from a PMA perspective? How do we communicate with our stakeholders so you can get a better idea of how to engage with us and how we've been engaging over the time frame of the last 18 months. But to be quite honest, prior to COVID, what other opportunities are there for you to engage with our office, and how can we move forward in a more progressive and constructive manner? And then I'll just summarize what we told you. But at the end state, like I said, our job is to make sure that we have ASC across the spectrum that helps us to win in a contested environment. Next slide. So a little bit about the program office as a whole, talking about the PMA's message. So at the top of the slide, you'll see our mission. And what that does is it enables us to provide affordable capability and effective capability to the field. At the bottom of the slide, so that's our map, right? At the bottom of the slide, you'll see where our vision is laid out. That's where we're going in the future. in order to be scalable, integrated, and feel that future capability to win awards of tomorrow. And in the middle of the slide, we look at near, mid, and far term. How do we get from the now to the future state? And what I want to talk to you a little bit about, and I'll touch on in some of the future slides as we talk about the different IPTs, is just talking about, we are a joint program office, not joint by nature that we have other, services connected to the program office, but what we do and the systems we build and procure and deliver touch not just the NAE, but joint forces, other agencies, and our ally partners. We are small but mighty, right? We do a lot with very little in a small group of people. And you'll see that as I go through all the things that are in our portfolio. A little bit different than some of the platform program offices that you've probably heard, right? Where they're going out, they have a platform and they can look and say, this is our priority, top to bottom, as it relates to this platform. We're servicing multiple platforms and multiple stakeholders. So it makes it so you have to be dynamic, you have to be agile, and we have to constantly have our ear to the ground to see what's going on and make sure we're talking to the folks and getting that feedback in to make sure we're connected and aligned with those platforms that we support, as well as the other services. I'll talk about a little bit about the high-end fight, right? I'm sure as you've gone through, the day and the weeks here, and you've looked at the news and looked at what's going on, we are in a near peer-to-peer situation, right? The high-end fight is in the Pacific. We are trying to make sure that the tools and the things that we have are modernized and effective and can meet that high-end fight. Can we get into that contested environment? How do we do that? And if we have systems that are not doing that, what can we do to change that, right? To continue to sustain those that need to be sustained. And then, as the CNO said in his testimony and several other areas, right? His theme for this year is divest and invest. How can we do that effectively by not cut capability? And then I want to talk a little bit about, we talked about modernizing and streamlining. We can't do that without talking about some things that most people look at as probably the tail of what we do, right? Which is the sustainment of logistics. We can't overlook some of those aspects because we've seen that readiness has been a degrader for a lot of folks over the years. If we do not put the effort and time into those readiness and resourcing and the sustainment aspects of things up front, as we're developing and delivering these items, we're doing a disservice to the warfighter on the back end, right? We want capability that's going to live for a long time. We want capability that is going to be agile. It's going to be adaptable and something that we can easily, adapt and change as circumstances and complexity of the situations and the operating environment that we're in can change. And then lastly, I want to just expand on Unit Together, right? Our ASC opportunities with our allied partners. A lot of what's come out in the National Military Strategy and the National Strategy is talked about, the NSS has talked about our allied partners. We cannot go without it. And certainly from our portfolio's perspective, we have several foreign military sales opportunities as well as cases that we're working, but we do not go. We have trusted partners from not only within the Department of the Navy, as well as the other services, like I mentioned, but across the defense spectrum. And so we are going to lean heavily into that. I think it's an area that we have not capitalized on as much within the portfolio. And I certainly think as things are adjusting within the DoD, within the budget, and there's some areas that we can certainly leverage and capitalize on moving forward with our allied partners. And like I said, all of that leans into in the long term, being able to commit to our vision and providing that future scalable capability in the future. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about our PMA portfolio. Our portfolio is, we're looking from left, we're going to read the slide from left, down, and then to right, so top to bottom. Starting with the left, those are sensor geometries and dispensers across our 4 teams. In each of those, you'll see the different products that we service within those. And then if you go down to the bottom, it looks at our USN and US Marine Corps supported aircraft, right? That doesn't take into account any of the joint aircraft that we also support or the other service aircraft. That's a lot of platforms. And then if you look at the top right or top left, from probably your perspective, that's our asset protection OB, and it talks to some of the capabilities that we provide across a different spectrum within the AC spectrum, right, across that range, EOIR, RF. and how, we see things and how we look at how do we assess those gaps and capabilities. And then leading into some of the stuff I talked about before, talking about survivability, sustainment, and the readiness piece of that. None of the things that we deliver and develop can be done without properly doing survivability, sustainment, and readiness aspects of that. And how do we look at how do we modernize that? There are different ways that we're doing that. I just came from the Marine Air Board in Dallas a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that the Commandant and DCA talked about was the logistics, right? If we can't get in, right, that's a problem. If we get in and we can't get out, that's a problem, right? So we have to look at the full kill chain of that. How do we do that effectively? How do we make sure that the things that we're doing are enabling those things to happen, right? And that lives in kind of the bucket of the sustainment, supportability, and the readiness aspects of that, and making sure those things are good to go. As we move forward, I'll talk a lot towards the end of the presentation about S&T, so science and technology, as well as test and evaluation. Some areas that are really key to some of the things that are going on in our portfolio, and I think are key markers that will help us to go faster, which is my goal, right? We want to deliver capability. We want to iterate on that faster. What are the things that we think are stumbling blocks, potentially, or constraints, right? And some of those areas that I think are constraints live in that T&E world. So we'll talk to that a little bit. And if some of you, if you've heard the presentation I gave at the PMA Industry Day, I touched on a lot of those. You'll see something, at least one of those slides that's very familiar with that as we move forward. But it's key to remember that those things are enablers for the things that we do, right? And so we can't have good technology if we can't test it and validate what we know, and then know that we can give the fleet what they need to operationally survive and thrive in this new environment. So one other thing I want to hit on, when I always hit on, and this is one of my favorite slides, so 20 programs, over 26 type model series aircraft, 33 FMS type model series aircraft on approximately about 1,500 aircraft that we support within the program office. It's not a small number, right? So lots and lots of stakeholders. So very apropos that they get it together. I need all of you, and I need all of the support systems surrounding that to make our portfolio work. Next slide, please. So I want to briefly just hit on this. This is the department and service guidance. I talked a little bit about what drives us, what gives us our prioritization for the things that we do within the program office. My previous job before taking over as the program manager was a strategic IPT lead. And what that was an arm to the previous program manager to help look out and up, talking about S&T, looking at defense strategy. How do we relate what we're doing now to what the future is going to look like? And what do we need to do from a flight planning, road mapping perspective, and talking to industry and academia in order to be able to get there, right? So one of the things we did, and one of the things we started to do within the program office, was build our knowledge base. And so we had intel briefs to make sure that our folks understand. We go out, we talk to the fleet to ensure that they understand what the intel environment looks like, but also so that they have the connection, right? And be able to put things in context from an informed perspective of why we're doing the things that we're doing. Also, those same dialogues with industry. I've been fortunate over the last couple of months that things have opened up for like a small window to be able to go out and meet with some of our industry partners and have just this dialogue in the right environments to really understand the things that you guys are working on from an industry perspective. We have a meeting with GTRI going to the academia side to look at what academia is looking at, and to use that to connect our folks and know what resources they have to reach out with. So it's not a single stream of, hey, here's how we've always done it, but let's open up our aperture, right, to look what's in the realm of the possible to really get the best capability. So some of the things I just want to hit on and just give you some slight takeaways and some things I think if you're from an industry partner, some things I think you should be looking at in order to be able to communicate and collaborate with us effectively. So what we do supports and aligns with the NSS and the NDS, right? There's some open source things that you can read that correlate to that. Take the time to do that, right? Take the time to look at the congressional testimony of what our leadership is saying, because that is feeding. If my boss is infatuated with it, right, I'm in love with it. So I'm going to make sure that I'm fully aligned with what he's saying and what they're doing, and making sure that the products that we're developing are not in disalignment, if you would, right, with what leadership wants. It doesn't make sense. It will not help me to advocate for the proper requirements, capabilities that we need, and it certainly will not help me to get the resourcing to be able to provide the capabilities that I need to provide for the work that I'm doing. A little bit else I wanted to talk about in that is also the competitive environment and where the Navy Marine Corps team is going, right? There's been a lot of talk about the Marine Corps, and I told you we have a Department of Navy, NAU, the Navy and Marine Corps, right? So we have sometimes competing priorities within those services. We have different resource sponsors for those, and it's important that our team understands where the prioritization is for that, where we can find synchrony in those efforts for the programs that we need that, as well as making sure that as we're briefing leadership, they understand the things that we need to be effective to be able to source the priorities that both of those services put out. Course design is a hot topic. I'm sure that you've probably heard over the course of the couple of days that you've been here. It's been on the Commandant's lips since he took over. He has a plan for 2030, and we are divesting to invest within the Marine Corps as well. We need to understand how that's going to affect the Marine Corps and Navy platforms as we move forward within the portfolio. So those are one of the areas with most, like I would say, probably 50% of our portfolio is supporting Marine Corps assets. It's important for us to keep our ear to the ground and find out how we can properly align and stay aligned with what the Marine Corps and where it's going and what the Commandant needs us to do in order to provide electronic warfare protection for those forces as well. And then just tapping on this one last time as we go forward, just the allied and industry partners, right? Over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of talk about whether or not we need to be, alone or together. We know in building systems and supporting the systems we currently have that we have to be aligned with our allies. We have very keen allies that we work with all the time, and it's important that we understand where they are, what configurations they need, what they can support, and how we can help one another, because we will be in the next contested fight working together. Next slide, please. Just going into a little bit about, so I talked to you a little bit about kind of what the guidance is, right? So talking about the security environment that we operate in and what drives our requirements on programs. I want to talk about, a little bit more about broad and expanding challenges across all the domains, including the electronic magnetic spectrum, right? So sometimes when we think of the domains, we think of the traditional domains, right? Air, land, sea, subsurface, space, cyber, right? We don't think about how that affects the electronic magnetic spectrum, which lives in all of us, right? It's something that we have to do. So we're concertedly looking out and not just talking to folks like NAVAIR, and we talk about our engagements with industry, we talk about our engagements with academia, but we're looking at across the other systems as well, looking at the best of breed. What are they doing? Are there things that they're doing within the other systems that we can lean into or capitalize on? Are there areas that we can come together and work together to maybe gain some efficiencies or look at how they're doing some policy issues that we might be struggling with? So we're always open to that. If there are other sectors, I know we work with some big industry partners, other sectors that your company is working in that might not necessarily just be the sector that you're working for EW. I'm always interested to hear what's going on in those sectors, because there's some things that we potentially could learn and leverage from and potentially share some of the ideas of what's going on as well. So, just the last couple of bullets really are no surprise, right? We're in a challenging environment. We're in a peer, in some cases, near peer environment, and that's not going to change. The commercial technology in the air defense world is constantly evolving. The enemy gets a vote, right, in what they do, and they're not standing still because it takes us a couple of years to develop capability or sustain that capability. We need to understand where they're at, hence the intel briefs to continue to keep the pulse of what's going on with the enemy, but also to make sure that we are looking at, from an industry perspective, as well as others, what disruptive technology is out there. What can we do to get into the enemy's lead? I mentioned going to the Marine Air Board the other day. One of the topics that they discussed was, maybe we need to think about this a little bit differently. Oftentimes we look at the Google loop, right, orient all the way to assess, right, and we're looking at it, and we have to make one full loop. Well, if we get in and disrupt their orientation, right, at the very beginning, and we can get into that loop at the far end of that spectrum, right, we have a chance, right, of getting in those areas. If they know that they're going to be the one, they have to change their tactics. That's what we want to drive. We don't want to wait until they're all set and everything's in place, right? We want to get in on the far end of that spectrum to change that orientation for them so that they have to disrupt the way they do business, right? That's one of the ways that we can change that. And a lot of systems that you'll see that we present are more geared towards self-protection, but there are some things within the portfolio that are geared towards threat ID, right? And making sure that we can be a sensor and provide that information both on board and off board to some of our other platform partners and others within the environment. Next slide, please. So just getting into a little bit more detail, here's some PMA focus areas and priorities. At the top of the screen, just a key on how to read this, so key focus areas going from left to right is the integrated AC across the entire spectrum. And that's provided include interactions and support to not just the NAE. We talk to MOTS, we talk to NOTIC, we talk to several other folks from the community that are living operationally, that are breathing this, that are using the equipment in order to get that back into our feedback loop as we do development and assess and sustain. And then the joint capabilities that we provide, not only within the Navy and the Marine Corps, but throughout the other services and our allied partners. And then that ASC sustainment piece that I talked about. We have folks from our team that go out across the country to support the Navy and the Marine Corps in grooming efforts to make sure that we're not just taking equipment out, we're making sure that they understand how to use it. When they have issues with it, we're showing them how to use it, and then we can better our systems as to how we provide them the information they need to be able to best use our civil systems and change our TTPs and other things if we need to, but to constantly iterate on the sustainment and readiness aspect of what we do. One of the areas in that you probably won't see it, and we'll talk to it a little bit further, is that we're not just looking at where we are today and the platforms we support, the TAC air, the rotary wing, the cargo aircraft, right? We're also looking at what's next, right? We know that we're in a manned-unmanned environment. We're moving more towards an unmanned area, and we want to make sure that we, from a portfolio perspective, can reach out to those other platform owners or those unmanned platforms and see how we can combine with them to provide capability, whether or not it's providing the systems for protection or ways that we can integrate with them to give them some of the information that we have and sharing that information with them as their TTPs and operational, their operations are changing as well. So these are the top priorities for each of our product teams. The three product teams, Assault, Combat, and Strike, are primary product teams on the left. FMS kind of is an underpinning of that feeds those other product teams. And then, like I mentioned, we'll talk about S&T and T&E a little bit later on, but those really are the underpinning, right? If we don't start with some of the development, you'll see as we talk through some of the IPTs, how they started from an S&T perspective or things that industry is doing, and we were able to transition that through the value of death, as many of you are probably familiar with, and align that with where we were going with the program in order to provide that capability and resource that capability and bring that to bear and bring it to reality, right, for the NAE. And then the testing and evaluation, talk a little bit more about how we can do that better, some of the challenges that we're having. I'm just going to lean into one of the IPTs a little bit to talk about that, but the common IPT is our IPT that is, they're based out of Jacksonville, Florida. They are expendables, chaff, flare, and decoys, also working with the JSF program office. And we're doing some exciting things with them, as you can see with advanced common carriage. We'll talk about that a little bit. Developing some advanced expendables in the EOIR domain, as well as looking at how we're supporting JSF AEC. Next slide, please. So like I said, I'm going to lean into some of the program stuff. I talked a little bit about how do we get here, what are our priorities, what's driving that. And now I want to talk about the three main IPTs that we have within the portfolio, starting with the Assault ASC IPT. So that's the detect and engage functionality. At the top, you'll see our radio frequency detection. That's our APR39. We have several different configurations throughout the fleet. Our newest configuration is the DB2, and that is going to potentially give us some RFCM capability that we haven't had in the future. We're excited about that, about what that capability will provide, and getting the rest of the fleet out of those legacy systems, all cut over to the DB2 system. Then going down on the bottom of the slide, in the middle you'll see the AR47, which is a legacy system that we still provide capability for, has done some great things for the fleet. We continue to sustain that and maintain that. To the left of that is our down-layer system. So if you think that about protection, laser warner and exhaustible for our two-color, for our transport and heavier lift type aircraft, and then to your left, we have the data system, right? That's our newest system that was a G1s that was developed, that we supported the large Navy G1s. We're still supporting that. We're looking to move to a program of record with the Marine Corps as the lead for that system. And then, but that is one area where we had an FNC that was able to transition and is still doing great things and providing great supportability and survivability for the fleet. Next slide, please. So this is our common IPT, and I talked a little bit about this previously when I did that little deep dive on the previous slide. Our current system is the LE47 dispenser. What we're doing is moving from that to our new program record, which is the common carriage. So the Navy's the only program, or the only service that has round rounds, right? Everybody else has square rounds. The Army, JSF, everybody has square rounds. So we have, embarked on the challenge to do square countermeasure. And so that is our new program of record, that we're moving from round to square. Don't ask me why. I've heard many theories about why we were round, including it's easier to push them off the ship so that they fall right off the deck, right? But many reasons why. But what we can do pivoting from the round to square is it gives us more rounds and more ability to put more buckets so we can carry more rounds. It also allows us to put exquisite countermeasures into those rounds, and it gives us commonality and supportability across the DoD, right? Because now we can leverage what the Air Force and several of the other services are doing, and so we're super excited about what we're doing with common carriage moving into the future. And then FUSIG, the Fleet Electronic Warfare Support Group, is our group that does our legacy RF jammers as well as some of our deploys. Next slide, please. So the last IPT I want to cover, and I am off mark on target here for time, but I'll try to get through the rest of this leave time for comments and questions, is our Strike IPT. Another program, our IPT, I'm excited about the work that we're doing. This is a robust team. They're handling a lot of things at DECM. Speed is the software footprint program that we're working on now. We just had a building decision for that. And provides capability across the spectrum to all of FAT, C's, D's, E's, and F's. And then our next is the ARC, Advanced Radio Countermeasure, is the next software block that we're working on. We're also in getting ready to put out an RFP for the dual band decoy, which is a tow decoy capability. So I know a lot of folks in the audience are interested in that capability as we move forward as well. And then lastly, the next thing that we're looking for into the future is our advanced EW, working with the F-18 program office to cover block 3 of the ENF to provide what's the next thing that we're doing for self-protect on the F-18, right, in support of that. So lots of work going on with that team. I definitely more for the SWIP and ARC programs is our ACAT-1 program. So lots of things going on. We look forward to the efforts working with our resource sponsors and industry on what comes next in support of the advanced EW concept. Next slide, please. So as they're queuing up the next slide, for those that were at Industry Day, you probably have seen this slide before. So HG Wells, right? S&T, what are we doing in the future? These are our broad focus areas for S&T, talking about some of the technology, the tests, and the concepts that we're interested in. Miniaturization and micro payloads, artificial intelligence and machine learning. What's new and upcoming? What can we put in our systems to make us more agile, efficient, and effective? And then from a test perspective, what are we doing for cognitive? What are we doing in the MBSE, modeling-based systems engineering world to make things better? How can we close that loop between what gets done in industry labs, what gets done in government testing lab, what we do and end up doing on open air testing lab? How can we close that continuum and make sure that we're more effective and we're using that time in constrained environment, getting out to the open air test and making sure that we can validate those things before we get. And then some future concept, distributed ASC, employment concept, man-on-man teaming, like we talked about. How do we look into the future of what ASC will look like and self-protect will look like in the future? And how can we get ahead of that now and plan for that as we move forward? Next slide, please. All right, testing evaluation. I won't stick on this slide a lot, but I did talk about it up front. And I'll tell you that the areas that I think we're struggling with within the program office, it's hard to get on test ranges, right? There's a lot of programs that have priorities. We're competing against theirs, as well as, trying to get the threat resources that we need to really be representative of what we need to really test and ring out these systems to make sure they are operationally effective for the folks that need it. So I'm asking you, from an industry perspective, from an academic perspective, those that are listening, what can you do to help us, right? There's been a lot of conversation about digital twins, right? What can we do from modeling and simulation? How can we do those things up front to bend the curve to make sure that before we get to an open air test range, which costs a lot of money, not just the time and prioritization to get there, that we can have the best system, and we've done enough runs to validate what we know and what we don't know and get the best system out there, right? So I'm looking to see what unique evolutionary things maybe that you're doing in that realm that we can capitalize on. There are also policies that I think we can work on as far as, hey, if you're testing in your industry labs, how can we get the government to accept those? There are stumbling blocks that we've come across over the years, right, that have stopped us from being able to get that technology and get your testing sometimes, and we have to repeat that testing. That's a load on the program office as well as industry that I'd like to see us overcome. And then the vision for testing from our perspective with the PMA-272, so you have common test tools, standards, methodology from the contractor to the government to the open test. Next slide, please. And then I want to touch on this, in it together, as I start to close up my comments and leave you about 10 minutes to have some questions and comments for me. This is our stakeholder map of how we built out our algorithm, if you will, for talking to industry. We've tried to be very deliberate about this because without being deliberate, we're going to miss it. We have, like I said, a lot of stakeholders, and it's hard sometimes to figure out who we need to engage with, when we need to engage with them, and what's the best venue to do that. So if you're looking at this chart, if you look at the middle column, those are and we'll start probably at the top. So who, right? OSD and ASN, service leaders, and then what do we use to do that? We use the POM engagement strategy, program support, funding support. We're briefing to those folks, and you'll see that follows the same theme. And the symbols on the far left of me are the symbols associated with that group. And why, right? Because it provides us, that's the part, this far corner, right, is the guidance, oversight, and resources in order to be able to do our jobs, right? So we try to use this to reach out to NAVAIR PMAs, as I talked about, other PMAs, other SysComs, Fluid Weapons School, to get that feedback loop of, hey, we gave you a piece of equipment. Are you using it the way we kind of intended? Are there things we need to tweak as we go through this agile process of making it better? And then reaching out to industry and academia. Next slide, please. So in closing, I just wanted to talk about, what I told you, right? So I told you a little bit about the guidance that we're provided, why we do the things we do, what drives us, the environment, who we do that with, industry, academia, other program offices, as well as other systems. What challenges, what our core programs are within Strike, Assault, and the Common IPT, as well as the areas from S&T and moving into the future that we're interested in, and knowing that we need to also provide the underpinning of sustainment and readiness as we move forward into those areas. Some challenges that we have moving forward into what our focus areas are for S&T, as well as the TME challenges I think that we're gonna have to struggle with, right, until we can get that close collaboration together with industry. And then just to talk a little bit about kind of why we're here at Senior Space. So on the website, apparently it says that as the largest maritime expo in the U.S., Senior Space brings the U.S. defense industry and key military decision makers together for 3 days of informative educational sessions, important policy discussions, and dynamic exhibit offering, right? And that clearly ties in with our comp plan that I just showed you. How do we get to our stakeholders? This is a great venue for me to be able to do that, to reach out, to touch base with folks that have things that are pertaining to our portfolio, but for me to learn as well. about what's going on with our industry partners and others that I might not have met, and to talk to folks from industry and academia, as well as to catch up with some old friends. So this is a great venue in order to be able to do that, to highlight the things that are going on within our portfolio. So I really appreciate the time today that you guys have given me to be able to tell you about our portfolio, talk to you about the expansiveness of it, what we're doing in the future, and be able to, at the end of it, right, engage with all of you. So I appreciate that, and thank you for your time today. So with that, that's the end of my closing remarks.
We'll now open the floor if anybody has any questions. Yes, sir.
I will ask. Skipper, quick brief. Can you give us a little more detail on the path ahead for advanced EW?
So for Advanced EW, I told you that that was part of our STRIKE portfolio. We're working with our resource sponsor at OFNAV and 98 to develop the requirements and the resourcing associated with that. Our goal is to provide a capability. We don't want to be constrained by what resources necessarily we have. We want to make sure that end to end we're providing the right capability. So we're working diligently with our N98 sponsor, receiving grants from industry, as well as talking to the FAT program office, working hand in hand with them to make sure that what we have now brings us towards that capability that we need in the future for the advanced EW. We expect that we should have some idea of what that requirement looks like and the scope of that requirement towards the end of the year, leading into the next time cycle. So I'm excited, for our industry partners to be able to provide that information to them and to continue to collaborate and talk to you as we work through that process.
Anyone else? Any further questions? Okay. Carl, thank you so much. Wonderful presentation, and thank you again all for joining us.